one.
Hey, fellow G and Tears, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. Well, we, for this episode, are talking about suffering. Quite a grabber for an episode, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about. It is part of our ongoing discussion on Gnosticism and its features, especially how it compares with other Christianities and maybe other spiritual beliefs. We're doing this because, in part, the situation in the world where obviously there's a lot of what they call in the Buddhist world dukkha or dissatisfaction or suffering kind of going on. A lot of this at work, and we had this desire to ask this kind of the big questions, like essentially about like what the fuck is happening. So that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to talk about this issue primarily from a Gnostic point of view, but also looking at it from other points of view too. So a very deep and philosophical and metaphysical episode to come. But first, we'll ask you to do all the things that people always ask you to do, which is the like and the subscribe, maybe share an episode, maybe write a review. We're all ultimately trying to escape from the suffering of the algorithm. So if you can help us out doing that, that would be awesome. You know, as we like to say on this little pod, it's a labor of love. We're trying to share things that we think are psychospiritually meaningful. So if you can help us out, that would be greatly appreciated.
And on that note, yeah, if people would do me a favor, do us a favor, leave a comment on here, even if it's just a letter or something like this. I feel like since we've been on this topic of Christianity and history of Christianity, and then moving in here now, are not that people care, not that we are totally attached to it, but like, and I didn't talk about this, Eric, earlier, so I apologize. Uh, our views are way down, way
Mhm.
down. And it's interesting because as soon as we started talking about this, that's when it happened. So I'm not saying maybe people just aren't interested in it, but our content has been relatively within the same band over the last couple of years. So, anyways, audience, enough said. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in. Leave a comment or a thumbs up. That helps us. That's it.
So what do you think? You think people don't like talking about Christianity?
I don't. I'm not saying it's the people.
Ah, hmm. Interesting.
Anyways,
Interesting. Okay. Um, interesting. Okay, so I guess to like be considered as we go.
yes.
All right. Well, okay. So we'll see if this performs better in the algorithm. Talking about suffering. Okay, we'll see.
That's yeah.
All right. So, well, I think like, you know, what got me, you know, like as a starting point for this would be just really getting to how important this question is, right? Like the fact that this whole question of like what's the source of human suffering is probably, I think, one of like the quintessential like religious psycho-spiritual questions you got in the whole world, right?
Hmm.
And what one thinks about that. Why does this even exist? And then, you know, to the extent that it does exist, what do you do to fix it? And like how you source it then really kind of matters.
Hmm.
So, you know, I think that, you know, one of the biggest promises of like spirituality, Tantra, Buddhism, and all the other things that we have as sort of our home bases are like what this is about. And it made a big difference to me, like even back in my 20s when I was first getting into these questions and I was like going to study Zen and all that. That was really one of the main questions that certainly in the Buddhist world, like people are saying that they're trying to address. You know, the Buddhist thing was like, how do I deal with the problem of like the suffering of humans and other living things? Like, what do we do about that? And taking
Hmm.
that problem really seriously. Do you see that in the same context, Daniel?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
do.
Okay. So then you might wonder, like, I'm going to use like the Buddhist conversation about this just a little bit, because then you end up with this thing of like, well, what is, you know, like, what is this word dukkha or what gets translated as suffering? Like, what do they really mean by that? And I think the tantric Buddhist world being as it is, especially the parts that we're coming from, they're willing to like say, okay, here's what they mean, and they're really willing to spell it out. So, you know, quick, but just these are the things that you're trying to solve: birth, aging, sickness, death. These are the questions that you're trying to grapple with, right? As a human being,
I would
deeply
also
as
add relevance in there.
well. I mean, you could put that in if you
Yeah,
want.
you
They're
could put
not,
right.
yeah. Meaning,
Well, people have, I think it, and I say this because I think people who are seeking for relevance, especially in positions of power, do tons and tons of damage in the process for them trying to hold on to relevance in one sense. You could call it power in another sense, but I think relevancy, how do you, and then especially with people in power, dictators and things like this, when they get to the end of their life, it's they rarely turn into like more positive people. It ends up being like, okay, how do I leave my legacy? How do I leave my mark? How am I going to be remembered? And this ends up having detrimental effects, which causes all the other things that you just mentioned.
Well, I guess, I mean, I was doing the technical aspect of this, but we can put other words in. And I guess,
Yeah.
you're saying like relevance means like, I guess the way you're framing that is something like you get to the end of your life and you feel like, what do I do to like, again, leave a mark or something like that? Hmm.
Yeah, essentially, I guess I could say maybe it's a relation to like trying to overcome death in a sense. Like I'm
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
live on
Mhm.
forever, right?
Yeah, I guess people try to do that in different ways, right?
Yeah.
Some people will try to do that through family things, right? I have
Mm-hmm.
my kids or whatever. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As a way of trying to cope with this idea of like life ending. I guess so. There's like eight of them. The four are like it's hard to be born. It's hard to go through the whole process of growth and development. You watch kids. It's not that easy. I suppose you can flash back on your teenage years and go, wow, that wasn't pleasant, parts of that. Because you're
Mm-hmm.
going through all those changes and how it plays havoc with your emotions and havoc with things. Sickness, of course, unpleasant. Aging, as you see, the body isn't going to work as well as it used to. That's like not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying with death, and it's like then you're talking about almost like I guess what you're bringing up is like coping mechanisms around that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What do you do to cope? Yeah, yeah, I see it. Then they give four others, and maybe it fits into what you're talking about here too, Daniel. So they'll say, I mean, just to give the technical stuff with this, right? And this part of the educational goal of this podcast. But dealing with unpleasant situations is a kind of a dukkha, right? You're stuck with something that's unpleasant. Loss of connection to things that you love and you want to be close to is kind of an unpleasant thing. So they kind of observe that too.
Mm-hmm.
And then this idea of really not getting something that you deeply want, like that's particularly painful, right? So, if someone really wants to be a mom or something and it just doesn't work out for them, like those kinds of
Mm-hmm.
deep feelings. I want to be an artist and no one recognizes me and it's painful, these kinds of deeper pains. And then the last one they have is dealing with the flaws that are there within the body and the mind, that they're kind of erratic and unstable, right? By their nature, the body will go up and down, the mind will be going up and down, and you have to sort of deal with those things. So those are the four. I don't know what you think about the relevant stuff. Do you feel like that kicks back to some of these other things too?
Well, yeah, for sure. You're talking about not being recognized as an artist.
Hmm.
I think even the familial one, there's like obviously a large genetic component to this. I mean, you have children, Eric. I know most of my friends and family members do. And I think most people agree that they've enjoyed that experience.
Yep.
Not easy. Um, but there is a bit of a legacy in this case. I mean, without the children, we wouldn't be here. So I'm someone's child, you're someone's child. There's the
Hmm.
necessity to continue the species, which we rarely look at ourselves as a part of a species together. We're very focused on how we're different, not how we're similar, right? But I think in that sense, there's its own idea of legacy, left passing, trying to pass on the better qualities that parents have for their children as a way of maybe not staying relevant, but addressing your impact on the world after you're gone.
Yeah, we were talking before we got on mic about like the deeper things that drive people. And this is just, hits me on a personal level and we'll see how it hits other people. But I didn't have any real connections to like being a parent. I didn't really care,
Mhm, mhm.
which seems like it could be a painful thing for kids to hear, but it's actually almost ends up being the reverse. Because I can say to my son or my daughter, like, well, I wasn't really even that into this, but you're so awesome that you've made it a joy, which is true. Like that's actually the truth of the situation. So I don't feel much of like the legacy thing though, connected to
Mhm,
that, which I think
mhm.
goes to show that there's like these deeper driving impulses that we were talking
Right.
about before I got a mic and people. And I suppose if you do feel like you really didn't get those things that are feeding those deeper impulses, then you'll feel a vacuum or something, right?
Right.
Especially at the end of the life or something like that. This can feel like a
Mm.
real hole.
Hmm.
So, all right. So, I mean, just to do it, if you're like, well, what are we even talking about? At least that's a way of trying to frame the question, right?
Right.
And then what do you do about that? Which I guess it's bold to say that there should even be an answer. Because as we are talking about a little bit last episode, if you get to like the more scientific materialist kind of way of thinking about things as we were kind of kicking it around last time, there really is no answer and really no problem per se, right? Because, you know, uh, there's no underlying like deeper thing that you have to crack within that essentially. You live in a universe like we were talking about that's kind of statistical, kind of random, kind of chaotic. It doesn't necessarily have some underlying thing that has to be solved. Things are going to go up and down. It just is how the fuck it is. You'll ride whatever the waves are of your life. And so in that sense, there's nothing really to be solved. It's just, okay, that's just life. It goes up and down and you deal with the problems of the world as they present themselves. But there's nothing, it wouldn't make any sense on some level if you have that worldview to try to crack some deeper problem because the problem doesn't sort of really exist, I guess. Does that make sense to you? How do you think about that?
No.
But people think that way, right? It's a cultural phenomenon, right?
Yeah, yeah, but no, but that
Yeah.
doesn't make a lot of sense.
Mm. I sometimes wonder, what do you think the percentage of folks who kind of feel that way? Because it's such a deep thing, at least in American culture, to think this way, especially because it's
Say
such a
say more,
weirdly,
say explain it a little bit differently because I'm not grasping what you're putting down.
well, I mean, if you really believe that like I'm an end product of some evolutionary thing,
Mm.
there's
Okay.
no particular thing for me to solve. I mean, a lot of my friends who are like that, they're like, well, what problem is there even to solve? It's just shit happens, right?
Okay.
Forces
Okay.
play themselves out. Maybe my life will be good, maybe it'll be bad, but there's no deeper like nut to crack or something. If you think
So
of like
you're
a Buddha or something, he's like, I'm going to try to solve the problem of human suffering.
right. So
And I'm
what
going to
you're
meditate and explore, and I'm going to try to crack this thing, right?
so your approach is a very, very materialistic. You're talking about a very Western minded, spiritual materialistic person who looks at life as a collection of random occurrences and chaos and entropy and neg entropy, and it just is what it is. So you do your best. If you want to be a good person, that's good. That probably feels better,
Hmm.
and gives better to the world because you're doing good, and that's nice to help. We all want to be helped, but ultimately, there's nothing else to crack because it's a quagmire inside of a puzzle, inside of a Rubik's cube, being digested by an ant. So why bother?
Yeah, there's nothing really to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that worldview doesn't lead to like you can solve relative problems. And I'm not saying that people who have this mindset, aren't like kind people or something. They don't want to
Right.
help
Right.
other people. They do, but it's like there's no deep philosophical, metaphysical, spiritual thing to crack. There's nothing there, right?
Mm,
The question is moot, you know?
mm.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to get your mind around, but I mean, if you're looking at it from the point of view of we're so devoted to these things and that's kind of our jam. But for other
Yeah.
people, you kind of like, I'm like, nah, like it doesn't make sense from the way that they look at the world. I got the book with me. I just grabbed this off the shelf.
A
I have
Buddhist
to
philosophy.
go
Yeah.
with this philosophy. So what it really is, it's a book about, at least in part, all these different Buddhists trying to understand their own different ideas within Buddhism because they know there's different people with different ideas, but
Right.
also like just trying to understand how a lot of other people in India think because it's a book written originally in India with comments
Mm.
later from Tibetans. But I guess that's what I'm trying to do here a little bit too, to say, okay, how do people really think,
Yeah.
right? And it's part of that tradition within Buddhism Tantra. Like, okay, how do people really look at the world? And I guess I really believe that that's an important thing to do to try to crack, okay, what are people actually thinking? And my friends who are maybe more from this mindset, I think when you dig into it, I guess you're being philosophical. This would be phenomenology, true, trying to
Right.
get in the
Yeah.
heads of how people think. I think this is sort of how they think, you know?
Yeah.
So
I
if I were
think
to
it's a
say to
good
my friend that, like, okay, well, there's something here to crack, you'd be like, well, there really isn't.
it's a
Yeah.
good question. Even if there, I mean, forget the answer for a moment. I think it's a good question to ask oneself. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I agree.
even if you don't come up with anything or come up with some answer that changes every day or every other day or every week or whatever, just the you and I talked earlier about remembering things, remembering to ask the question. You
Mm.
know, it's almost like I feel like it's almost one of these daily things that people should check in with themselves and ask like what's important. Is putting 20 seconds or 30 seconds of my day on larger philosophical, existential, universal, questions in and around humanity worth the exercise in thinking about? I would say the answer is absolutely yes, because it's very challenging for your conceptual mind, and I think it's even for a very Western minded person, it's probably a nice doorway into non-conceptual thinking. And I feel like there is so much to be had and experienced in non-conceptual thinking, especially for people who are very Western minded. I know I was talking with our resident anthropologist, one Ryan K. Davenport, on the telephone the other day, and we were talking about meditative practice and things like this. And he said that his partner, is not from the U.S. She's from Eastern
Okay. Yeah, from Asia.
Eastern
Mhm.
Asia, and he said they just think different. Their
Mhm.
mentality is different from birth. And so what we find like astounding in some philosophical ideology, to them it's like, oh yeah, of course. It's no other way than that because that's how it is. But because
Mhm.
they've been conditioned in that way, they are able to grasp some of those maybe more fantastic tales. And for people who don't know what I'm talking about, there's many stories that exist in different traditions of they're analogy stories, analogical stories, like any
Parables. Yeah.
yeah, like any tale that we tell people, that to teach them a lesson or something like this. But oftentimes they tell these great tales that are hard to conceptually understand. The Upanishads is one book
Hmm.
that it's in this way. There's other ones too. And he was just saying that they're taught this way from very young. Westerners are not taught this way. We're very based on, Descartes as like the king. I think, therefore I am. And
Hmm.
so it's very much rationality. One plus one is two. If it doesn't fit that line, this is, what they used to call mansplaining, right? Logical, this and then this and then this and then this. But that is not the only way of thinking. Math is not the only subject in school. People don't get in their car and turn on math. They get in their car and they turn on music most of the time. Music, of course, there's formulas for music, but music is an art, and art doesn't always follow structure. So I know this is kind of a bit of a tangent, but I think for people who are listening, thinking about this kind of question takes you outside of your normal way of thinking in a way that can help you to have new perspective on things that you might have never thought about. And then if you can use that in your own life, this is a way to kind of like, I don't want to say unlock productivity, but really change your perspective, in a subtle way or maybe even in a greater way.
Well, I think at the very least you can figure out what it is that you actually think,
Sure.
right? I mean, I think that's something too, to dig around with the attitude of going, okay, what do I actually think?
Mm-hmm.
Do I think that there's some, like, okay, if I go back to myself doing Zen back in the day, if you really don't think that there's something to be solved, you probably wouldn't do that thing. So
Mm.
you have to believe there's something that can be solved. Otherwise, why would you bother? It doesn't make any sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even if I had friends who were, I have lots of like sciencey friends, and you would say, hey, you want to do this thing, and they probably would to themselves be like, well, there's nothing to solve. Why would I bother doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Where if you really get into it, if this speaks to you, or if you find that you have that quality within you, however you want to talk about this, then you could be highly motivated to say, no, I want to kind of try to crack this problem. Buddha did it. Maybe I could take a tumble at it too. And I'll try to solve it as well. And maybe I'll use some of that guidance from people who have thought about this as well. But
Mm-hmm.
it's discovering that yes, I believe there is something to be solved within this, and I'm going to try to put my energies into doing that. You have to believe that on some level. So I guess I'm, like maybe part of the thing is figuring out, okay, what do you actually think when you
Right.
dig inside yourself? I think that's a good question. Since we're being philosophical, I did think of like the great philosopher Albert Camus, when you really get people kind of trying to like address this through this like the framework we were talking about before. Well, there really isn't any deeper meaning. You know, if you look at it as a historical thing, people are challenging the religions around them. Camus, great existential philosopher, right? And he's like, yeah, what do you do if you do come to the conclusion that, well, okay, we don't believe in Christianity anymore, we're going to let that go. We're dropping that, right? Now we're going to really fully embrace a view that's more rooted in the kind of things we were talking about, kind of a scientific, materialist, rationalist world, right? But then we find out that there's no deeper meaning in it. What do we do? So Camus kind of called this like the absurd, right?
Mm.
And he has a really profound essay on it where he's like, if you just feel like there's no other underlying meaning, if that structure has fallen away, if that was given to you by the religion of your culture and you don't believe it anymore and that falls away, then what do you do? And there's a very famous essay of his where he talks about like the myth of Sisyphus, talking about myths,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
where you push the rock up the hill and it rolls back down again, and you push the rock up the hill and it rolls back down again. And he's like, well, that's absurd on some level, but how do you if you don't think there's any other deeper purpose, you're kind of like that. But he kind of tries to frame it in the more like, okay, so you have to find, you know, uh, your meaning within the absurdity of that or something. He's really willing to embrace that. So, I mean, as far as like the extent that we're being philosophical, there's someone trying to address that question in that way. And he said, yeah, well, you have to like, what was the old David Bowie line? Turn and face the strange changes. This would be like
Mm-hmm.
turn and face the absurd,
Mm.
and you could take that attitude, right? But it's interesting because it was people trying to, again, we're being philosophical for the episode, right? It was people trying to address that question,
Yeah.
right? We've lost the meaning as a culture that maybe a certain kind of religiosity gave us. It's gone. So now we're facing a world where, okay, maybe this is what we believe about the world, and then this is sort of his way of trying to talk about that. So, all right, a little education around that stuff for our little pod. What we also talked about last time, and I wanted to add, possible to go on the deeper tangent about this, and I'll skip it for now, but I'd like to double back maybe at the end of the episode if we have time. But there's also like the other, what I would see is the other big side of American culture, which is sort of like your standard Orthodox religiosity, right? And we were talking about it last episode a little bit, and it was sort of like a lot based on punishment. Why is there suffering? Because you pissed off the deity and it's going to punish you. That's true. That's that way of thinking. And there's also that kind of the feeling of like the Lord works in mysterious ways.
Right.
So ergo, I'm just going to have to accept the fact that they're suffering. And, this is called like the theodicy problem philosophically, right? If the creative force, the creative God is all powerful and all benevolent, why is it such a shit show? That's the problem. And, as we talked about last time, even like one of my favorite scholars on this became an atheist around this point, Bart Ehrman. And he talks about that pretty honestly. He was a very religious, fundamentalist person. And eventually he moved away from that in stages. But what really turned him into an atheist was he couldn't get around this problem. It broke him on some level, you
Mm.
know? But I was having a conversation about this with, someone I know who was like a Soviet Union kid. And so she said, well, wait a minute, isn't it you're supposed to go to heaven? And then the suffering's supposed to end there. Religion is the opiate of the masses, I think was how she was brought up. And I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. But that is like another option on the table, right?
Mm.
That, your life might be suffering now, but if you have the right belief system and believe in the right deity, then you'll go to a place where you won't suffer anymore or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was weird for me because I didn't actually, when I was like brainstorming this out, I just didn't really even think of that thing. But I think that's probably what a lot of people who are kind of like orthodoxly religious kind of have as their belief, right?
Yeah.
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 So that's another alternative, I guess, on the table. Yeah, it's suffering now, but I'll die and I have the right belief system and I'll go to a good place or something.
Yeah. There's even some churches that will sell you plots of land in heaven. You could buy them here, though. It's great.
Is that the case?
Yeah, you can buy plots of real
Is
estate
that
in
like
heaven.
a Joel Osteen kind of thing?
I don't know exactly who did it, but I remember that and I was like, "Whoa,
Interesting.
that's a
Well,
hustle."
yeah. Get your hustle on for sure. Yeah. Um, yeah, there's a lot of places to go with that potentially. It's hard to look at like St. Peter at the gate waiting for you to come up with your deed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Salvation brought to you by at properties.
Here, I bought this thing.
Yeah,
And then
dude,
you're staring at you like, what?
I hate this guy. He's my neighbor. I thought this was heaven.
Yeah. But the
And
funny thing,
that's
yeah.
when it turns to flames and he's like, "Who said it was heaven?"
Yeah, surprise.
Mhm. Oh, you missed the elevator. The elevator came back down. Sorry.
Yeah. Hmm. So I was like thinking about like the apocalyptic view that we were also talking about too. And like I went down a bit of a rabbit hole around this because I was like, yeah, that probably is what I thought when I was like Catholic. When I was a kid, I probably had some idea like that in my head, right? I'm supposed to go to a heaven. But we've been talking a lot of like, part of the problem that's going on is we have these very apocalyptic kind of toxic Christianities that are in so much
Yeah,
power now, right? And even like if you look at like the war going on now that it's obviously both painful for both of us, it's such a tragedy. There's lots of reasons for something like that, but at least in part, it's driven by people's
for sure. Oh yeah.
apocalyptic desires, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the picture, right?
Yeah.
The people ideologically driven towards it. So it's kind of like, well, how does that sort of fit right into this like whole picture? And so I don't want to go through the whole thing of it, but it is kind of interesting. The idea is that people will, oops, this thing did something kind of weird on me. People will go through and, there'll be a rapture. And I was wondering about what happened to all those folks up in heaven. Where are they supposed to go? So there's an answer. They're supposed to come back down again.
Mhm.
And it's a whole long thing. And I think at some point we should talk about, but maybe not now because we're supposed to talk about Gnostics for a little bit. But, with the rapture, there's supposed to be a kind of a reconnection to all the bodies of people. They're all supposed to rise back up again. It's a whole big whoop-de-doo.
I mean, that just sounds like zombies to me. And from all the
Yeah.
movies I've seen on zombies, it ain't good.
Yeah, that's supposed to, but that's this, like, honestly, that's kind of what this is about. So maybe save for another time, but I got curious about it. So I did do a little research on it. And it's interesting to realize, like, again, people who are in really dominant pictures of power, this is what they're trying to trigger, this sort of more end game, end times rapture type thing going on, right? And then, there's going to be this rising of the spirits, and then the people from heaven are going to come down and they're going to have a kind of a party up in heaven, and everyone's going to get resold again. It's a whole thing. So, anyways, to be continued.
Well, it'll be exciting when Prince and Michael come back. They can do some concerts and stuff.
That would be part of the heavenly 1,000-year reign afterwards. We're all
Oh,
going to
okay,
live
cool.
getting our boogie on.
Great.
And the part that hit me about this, and I would like to talk about some other time, I don't want to get too like tangent about it, but what really hit me was, again, holding up my little Buddhist book, the thing of like really understanding how people think, you know?
Hmm.
And I think one of the things that's happened, in our culture is like, say you're trying to understand the evangelical mindset and you've never been around those kinds of people before. Their thinking is so different than yours, almost what you were talking about with Ryan. They think
Hmm.
so differently. And if you don't really understand them, you don't understand their mindset, you don't understand their language, you don't understand their beliefs, there's this huge cutoff and everything. I think it's part of what's fucking things up on some level from my vantage point. There isn't enough of this like really understanding of what this is about. Had kind of interesting conversation with again, like one of my, I would say, more scientific materialist kind of friends. And I was like, you really can't understand these people. I can sort of understand them. I was raised Catholic. I'm around a lot of evangelical people within my family. I get how they think. This is impossible for you to get how they think. It's so different for you. But anyways, I don't know. Do you think that that's true, Daniel? I think it's true.
Human beings think a lot
Yeah.
in general. They think a lot. We think a lot. I think a lot for various reasons. Um, You can't drink your own Kool-Aid sometimes. I think it's important to challenge all the things that you believe to be true. You really have to dig into them. I think that faith gets weaponized and it really invades people's thoughts and makes them question the internal voice that is not like infinitely accepting of every single thing that they hear. And it sort of like smooths everything over. I don't there's negatives to it. And so there's a lot of influence, I think conditioning is what they call it, right? That happens. But people think all the time, whether they're using that attention to investigate how they think about things and how they feel about them, I don't know that that gets done a lot. I think it does get done. I think people do. I'm thinking about people who are firm believers in X, Y, or Z, people who are firmly liberal or firmly conservative, if they even exist anymore, or firmly right wing or firmly racist or firmly whatever. You know, they've gotten to those places over longer periods and experiences, and I feel like their thinking is circular once you've sort of gotten to a place where your identity of what you think and believe and feel are now sort of unified, that there is not a whole lot of discrepancies between the various beings that reside within us. And so I feel like asking yourself what you actually think is an important process in order to shake loose some of the things that are still alive and questioning, some of the things that have yet to be beaten down or smoothed over by the conditioning of society. We, meaning Western people, assume that this is the way that it is all over the world. It's not. Newsflash, it is not. And so the influx of outside opinion is not a sign of weakness, as some might think. You know, in my opinion, it's a sign of strength because it allows you to take someone else's view of what it is that you believe, and then you get to pause your beliefs and hear their critiques and then be able to determine whether or not this still holds true after you hear that. This is critical thinking. This is what is lacking. I believe this is what is lacking.
Yeah, I guess like I hear you saying. I suppose in part for me, it's something like let's say a war starts, like what we're talking about, or all the stuff that's happening on the bigger picture level of things. Because I'm advocating for this, like, hold my book up, Buddhist point of view, where you try to understand, like, okay, where are these people actually coming from?
Hmm.
So I can actually understand, why they're motivated to do things that they do. Part of my motivation is I'm trying to trigger an end game time apocalyptic rapture stuff. I have to like take that seriously that this person actually believes this,
Yeah, of course.
you know? And like I really have to try to understand. And if I haven't like made the effort to really try to figure out where are these people coming from, then I'm going to be perpetually shocked
Yeah.
when they act
You might
out
be
what they actually believe.
you might be shocked anyways, even if you know
I
what they're
might
thinking.
I might be like confused, but I won't be shocked. I'm not a huge like Professor Zhang guy. I'm not big into him. I think maybe you spend a little bit more time with him than I have. He's
Yeah.
kind of like this guy out there who does a lot of like historical analysis and sociocultural analysis.
Yeah, a lot of game theory is his basis
Yeah.
for his, yeah.
And other things too, like as I'm listening to him and like at least he's taking this seriously. He's
Oh
saying,
yeah,
look,
very much
listen,
so.
these
Yeah.
people are ideologically driven. You have to
Yes.
understand, you get people who are
Yeah.
ideologically driven, they don't have the same on and off switches that you have. And if you don't understand that, you can understand them.
Correct.
Yeah. So, okay. So, anyways, we got some kind of feeling about this. My feeling of American culture, it's divided up between people who have this religiosity and people who are a little bit more scientific and materialist. And then into that, we can plop some Gnostics,
Hmm.
for a little bit towards the end of our podcast. We're supposed to talk about Gnosticism too, after we set the stage. And the Gnostics sort of have their own theory of why things are going to be suffering. And part of the reason why this is happening in the Gnostic worldview is because you got this corrupt force, this corrupt demiurge deity that's dominating the planet. It confusedly thinks that it's the highest power, and so you know it's the definitive force of the universe. And it has all these archonic figures, these kind of underlings that are like emanating out into the world, and they're like this oppressive force. So if you get to like what the problem of suffering is, what are you supposed to realize in a lot of like Gnostic thought? You're supposed to realize this feature of things, that there are these corrupt, oppressive forces that are weighing everything down, especially psychospiritually, keeping things entrapped, and you have to be able to escape out of that, right? So they put like a different place where they're putting where this suffering problem comes from, right? And it's like again kind of uh a different kind of way of like thinking about why is there suffering? Why is there suffering? Because there's these oppressive forces that are working in the world around you that are trying to crush things, and that's why they're suffering. What do you think, Daniel?
Yikes. What to
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
what is their practice in order, or what I mean, this is an observation of a what they would say is a natural phenomenon, but how is there address what do they do to address this?
well, I think first the idea is that you have to have a realization that that's the case.
Okay.
Until you realize, then you're going to be stuck. So then you have to realize like this is actually what's happening, right? You have to have the insight. And then in doing that, you have to like flip your worldview around. For most people, you're stuck in worldviews that are tied directly back to these obstructive, oppressive spiritual forces. They're directly tied back, right? Either because they're presenting themselves as religious things and spiritual things that are false, or they're trying to make you, I guess if you get to the other side, they would probably try to say that they're going to make you feel deluded by thinking that there is no deeper game afoot. It's just all random, blah, blah, blah. And then you're stuck, right? Either way, they got you.
Right.
Yeah. What's the old line from Usual Suspects? The devil's greatest trick is making people think he didn't exist or something like that.
Sure.
Right. So then you're in that kind of thing. So the first thing I think is supposed to be the realization that this is the situation that you're finding yourself in, and you're going to have to rewrite your whole way of thinking about like what's going on in the world around you. Obviously, this is a very like Keanu Reeves moment, right?
Hmm.
You have to figure out like this problem first, right? To
Okay.
recognize the situation that you're actually finding yourself in, right? And then the next piece is to realize, I guess if you go through it, and this does have correlations back with sort of some of the stuff that's maybe our home bases, like Buddha nature ideas. You have to realize that you have a divine spark within you. And part of what's trying to be done here is to like stop you from seeing your own divine spark. The
Mm.
forces of the world around you are trying to discombobulate you in a way that blinds you to like what your situation actually is,
Hmm.
and then what your own nature is as a being, that you're a divine spark trapped in a material shell. Now, there's a lot of like Buddhist Taoist stuff that gets to the same space. So I think in that sense, to my mind at least, I see an overlap between these ways of thinking. But I mean, do you see it that way too?
Well, I just just we'll just continue on that thread because I don't want to lose that piece. So their view then is that these archons and these negative factors, these forces are wanting to suppress the divine spark within the people so that they are subjugated and can be, I don't know, harvested for their energy or better subject or something like this.
Yeah, it's kind of a little parasitic thing too,
Yeah.
right?
And so then what is their recognition is
Already
the
kind of,
first thing.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, recognize that first that this is happening. Obviously, connecting with the divine, connecting with your own spark as the kind of next phase of that, and then what else is there?
Well, I mean, then you have to connect to the true source of everything too. So in their
Hmm.
way of thinking, there's a false kind of artificial deity, right? Or
Hmm.
deities, artificial worldviews that are designed to keep people entrapped. You have to
Hmm.
recognize that that's the case, that you're really under in a kind of an attack until you can see that. Point one.
Hmm.
Point two, you have to recognize that you have a divine spark within you that has to be realized. And then you have to realize that you have to connect to the true force of where the divine power is, which is outside the context of the normal channels that you think it runs through. That there's a transcendent source, a pure and transcendent source that you have to connect back to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the project.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you can say that about anything, Daniel. What is
That,
Buddhism about? Ba ba ba, and then what?
right. Well, but I
It's
mean
the
that I mean,
it's the same thing. It's the same. It is the Buddhist story. It's the same one. You have to
sure.
realize that you're under this thing. You have to realize that you have a divine spark of Buddha nature, and you have to reconnect with that and connect it
Mhm.
back. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And
But
then
right. Well,
I
but
don't understand the question.
the question is from the
And
audience
then,
who's the
yeah.
question is from the is for the audience who will be listening who will want to know that.
Well, I think that's the project.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I understand. But people are watching this. They're gonna want to
Well,
that
yeah, but if the whole point is like it has this feeling of like, okay, and then what? And then what? But they obviously are putting forth a program
yeah,
of spiritual freedom.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But for people who've never heard of Gnosticism before, if this is their first go through, then
Yeah.
that's gonna be revelatory.
Yeah, I think it is revelatory on some level,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah. Well, what do you think about it as a project?
No, I mean it's reminiscent to many other schools of thought. I think
Yeah.
the one part that Gnosticism has that I don't know how many other I mean Buddhism talks about it a little bit, but it's not as oppressive. The Gnostics are very much very clear about highlighting that oppressive force, the sort of false god, the they can call it the Old Testament God or the vengeful God or the that one that has this kind of like you said, like a parasitic kind of relationship with its subjects. This part is kind of different because they do emphasize that as like one of the key components of their beliefs, and that really separates them from other practices because they're sort of embracing, I don't want to say negativity, but they're embracing this oppression right out of the gate. They're like, yeah, no, this is not a real thing. I think if you think about the Old Testament, there's this, we've talked about this before, this kind of anthropomorphism
Mhm.
of divinity, and that it's vengeful, it's angry, it's can provide great things for its people, but then also is like, no, I'm gonna punish you all now. Here's this next thing. Here's this whole like, years and years of suffering. But the people end up going back to it because it is this their sole creator. And the Gnostics go, no, that's not the sole creator. It wouldn't do that. We don't believe that it does that. We believe this other thing and I think that the acceptance of that deity, at least what they believe, like the false deity is one of corrupt nature, um is just it takes the problem of suffering and it moves it directly in the center and says here is a reason that they believe is the cause for suffering, or is at least a causative factor of suffering, whereas I'm not so sure that outside of the word sin and the nature of humanity's desire to sin and Adam and Eve and whatever, you know, they're just like it's like, oh well, this programming is bad. Human programming bad. Not good. Eve ate apple, bad woman. Now man, bad too. Kicked out of Garden of Eden. You live in the streets, you're forever doomed. That's it. Maybe one day things can work out for you. Follow these rules. Oh, you didn't want to follow these rules? Okay. I'm gonna send down a child who's gonna, martyr himself for everybody. Oh, now you're all saved. Just believe in him. But you're still full of sin and still bad. So just do this one thing and now you're good. That still doesn't address the suffering. That still doesn't address, like you said earlier, the randomness of the universe. And because it highlights the people who have a materialistic, scientific materialism view of the universe, that things come and go and who knows? I don't know. I'm not worried about it, but this addresses the problem of that, and they have for a really long time, and they were considered, heretics and killed and, persecuted for, 1500 to 1800 years or whatever it has been. Um, but it takes the problem of not understanding, of not knowing, which is why it's called Gnosticism, because it's knowing. It takes this problem of not knowing why things are the way they are, and we could be maybe more specific, why they are fucked up as the way that they are, and says, well, here's a reason why. And it's not just that your programming is bad, because human sin, because human not divine. And it says that's actually partly true, but there's a reason for it. And that reason is different than what other people believe. So I like that part. I don't know if I necessarily believe in it in that way, but I do think that you know, it gets you to question what you think, which is kind of the theme of the episode, which is supposed to be suffering, but it's this.
Well, I mean, I guess part of the answer is like question what you think to see whether how it connects back to the fundamental problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. That ends up being like how it's sort of like woven itself together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm. I like this is the part of the episode, I guess, where we get kind of personal on these things too, right? Where this does something for me kind of interesting, right?
Sure.
I'm not sure where I draw the line either in terms of like, you know, do I think that there's a demiurge in a very literal sense, or do I look at that in kind of like a poetical way, like we talked about a little bit before, but I can see the problem, right? And then when you look at it from the point of view of someone who's trying to do, a kind of a Buddhist or tantric Buddhist project, which is like you ultimately want to see all beings be liberated, right? You want to see everyone kind of like escape. That implies that you're getting to something that you're supposed to escape from in some way, right? I suppose in a more like standard Buddhist Tantra view, the idea is that spirit has gotten trapped sort of in matter, right? Alchemical Taoist views too, these kinds of things. And you're trying to figure out how you get to this more transcendent thing, so that spirit is no longer trapped in matter. The Gnostic thing has a similar vibe to it, where you're supposed to realize, yeah, I have some kind of divine spark in me that's trapped somehow, and I have to learn how to liberate it or free it, right? In the Buddhist world, we use the word like moksha for that, right? I need to find a
Yeah.
freedom.
Freedom, yeah.
They've added like a piece to it, which is like, yeah, it's not just that the problem is that this spark is like trapped in matter in some way, but there's forces that are trying to keep it that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I suppose as I think about it for myself and I look at the, like the world around me, I think, yeah, there's something true about that, whether it's like literally true or poetically true, right? It does have this feeling that there are a lot of like oppressive forces that are trying to keep people psychospiritually subdued. That does make sense to me and that does resonate with me. I know it might not speak to everybody, but I think there's a truth in that on some level, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there's a question of can you free yourself and help others free themselves from these oppressive forces? That I do buy. So do you buy that there's like oppressive forces that are holding people down? What do you think about that, Daniel? Are you not in on
Eric,
that, or you feel
at
mixed
this
feelings about
point,
that?
with all the Epstein shit that
Yeah.
is out and continues to come out, can anybody really like hate or say anything to anybody else who believes in what might be considered a conspiracy at this point? Like, for me, I mean, fuck, anything's possible. Huh, you know what I'm saying? Like in the
Mhm.
middle of COVID, the government was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, aliens are real," and everyone's like, "Okay, cool, yeah, that's cool. All right." We got videos, we got testimonials. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then people were like,
Yeah, that's true, Daniel. That actually happened.
yeah, nobody gave a fuck. They're like, oh, all right, awesome. All the, millions of people who were like, I fucking told you, I told you. And everyone's like, yeah, okay, yeah, you were right. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Anyways, what's for dinner? Like it didn't, you know what I'm saying? So like, I think
Yeah.
on some level for people who are looking, are hearing this for the first time and they're like, what do you mean there's this like large oppressive force that's spanning the globe trying to keep us down? Oh, okay, I could see it.
I mean, that's kind of like the Archon idea too, right? That
Hmm.
there are these sort of like there's a corrupt power structure full of these Archons. It's hard to argue.
It is hard to argue.
Yeah, I was having a kind of a weird conversation with, again, one of my friends. He's much more like in like a scientific minded dude. but he like we've talked about these Gnostic things in different ways over the years, so he knows something about the at least the belief structure. And he's like, yeah, there's something to that. And he said a weird thing. He said he has nightmares sometimes about like Archons now.
Mm.
And he's like, yeah, they probably do exist, and they're probably trying to mind fuck me. And I was like, yeah, probably so.
Eric, just did we give a little context? So you have the false god they call it the Demiurge. We've done this before in the episodes on our
Yeah, yeah.
podcast, but we'll do it now. And then below that, kind of like secondary god, the false one, the bitter one. Then it has archons, which are, we can call them like negative angels that
Yeah.
sort of that rule over. Is it like parts of the earth, or is it parts of the universe, or they have like region? I don't know exactly how they.
I think probably they get different things with that, but they're supposed to kind of spread themselves out like a matrix,
Hmm,
and they're kind of spread out in different ways, probably having their little fiefdoms or something. But I think if you
okay.
draw the parallel down to like, if we try to make it really real, like what you're doing, then this would be like a way of talking about the Epstein class, right?
Okay.
And they're the archons. You know what's weird about it? And this is a terrible thing, as we get to the end of an episode where we're kicking all this stuff around. But what really hit me, I was listening to some lectures on Gnostic stuff. Prepping for this, there's a guy who's a scholar on this named David Bracca. And so he has like a great course thing on it, where they do lectures on things. And, you can just listen to the lectures. And I was listening through it. And it's like weird because they talk about, you were bringing up myths earlier, right?
Mm,
And their mythic structure. And so, in the myths, there's like all of this sexual violence. It's kind of bizarre.
mm,
And I was thinking, wow, that's very Epstein class too, in the sense that like they talk about these archon type figures. Again, we're talking archetypal now, right? Let's be Jungian. There's an archon archetype out there, and there are certain people that will be possessed by that archetype and act that out, like a Jeffrey Epstein, right? Power hungry, wanting to dominate others. And then there's a sexuality aspect, which is like horribly toxic. And there's always this R word stuff going on. So it's
mm,
almost like this weird thing where they talk about them being drawn to female beauty, human female beauty, and then wanting to like kind of crush it on some level, but then at the
mm,
same time try to like steal the spark of the beauty out. And I was like, wow, that's super Epstein class too, right? This obsession, with female beauty, and this obsession with, the power of female beauty, but also this desire to like crush and control it, and also like steal it somehow, right? Steal the spark. And I was like, God, it's like, damn, that's really like that isn't, if we put on our Jung hats as an archetype, man, that's really on point, right? Once you got what you were talking about, all of a sudden you see all this Epstein class stuff. It's about power, it's about sexual dominance and like sexual violence and control and like stealing the spark. I was like, yeah, it's hard, you know, not to see that piece too. And I was, as I was saying, I was prepping for the episode, I was like bouncing this off a friend, and he was like, yeah, there's something about that. If you make it archetypal, again, like what we were talking about, I don't know if you have to metaphysically believe every little piece of it, but as a framework, and maybe that's what Carl Jung as a thinker saw in this too. As a framework, it's, I don't know what Jung would say now if he had to see all of this explosion of this archetypal Epstein violent archon type stuff, but I'm sure he would call it out that way. Does that make
mm.
sense to you?
Yeah, I'm just thinking like if, slightly not a tangent, but yeah, it's something where you can't deny the uniform evil that runs throughout anytime you mention that person's name and what was done. And it's not normal evil. It's not like, okay, I robbed a bank, I punched somebody in their nose, I
Yeah, I know what you
did
mean. Yeah.
vandalism. This is not that kind of
Yeah.
criminality. No one stole someone's cryptocurrency or scammed some old lady out of her car. It's not that.
It's not even like Godfather movie type evil either. It's not even that. It's something else. You're right. That's a good call.
And so when you think about, so that I brought it up for this reason, because then if you're listening to this and you're like, Archons, what do you mean? Negative angels? That's strange. That doesn't make any sense. But then, you look at something like this, which is not a small thing, and I'm not cherry picking this example. This is a very large example, right? That was literally going on for, I don't know, 25, 30 years, all over the globe, that it touched all kinds of people from all different walks of life. And not even necessarily only rich people, but, the intelligentsia or intelligentsia, if we want to be, highfalutin about it. It touched
Or
many different
preying
kinds
on
of
preying
people.
on poor people, right? And a lot of the
Yeah.
victims are like poor girls.
And I was like, man, this is like the opposite of Jesus's teachings, like for sure. For sure. And so then you think about it and you're like, how could people be like this? What's going on? Is it that much of a sickness? Because I mean, dude, Noam Chomsky went to the island.
Did he go to the island or did he just meet with him? I don't know
Well,
the details of that,
I don't know if he
to be
went to the island, but
honest.
he definitely met with him.
Yeah.
They were trading emails. They were connected after.
They were certainly cordial, right?
Yeah.
And they were in conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just something where you're like, okay, well, what's attracting people to this thing? Again, if you're looking, if your mind goes, well, this is just random shit, humans are fucked up, the programming is off, that's how it goes. That doesn't satisfy my curiosity. And I don't think it satisfies anybody's curiosity, really, given the traction that this has and has had now for many, many years. So if people are willing to question the validity of how it is that this is all connected, then I think it's only like a one step away from questioning if things are connected in a universe as well. And from the perspective of the Gnostics, just wrapping it back into our conversation, this is absolutely influence of the Archons on reality, you know?
Yeah, I know. I think like even like when we were talking earlier, it makes me a little huffy. Even when we were talking, I got a little huffy. But I think the reason it makes me so huffy is just like, I've been doing this spiritual stuff for decades now in my life. You care a lot about people freeing themselves from
Mm-hmm.
these structures. I mean, we both care about that. And it like it makes me so impassioned, right? I've only had a couple episodes where I feel huffy. But this is one of the ones where I was like, and I think part of like, why does it make me feel so strongly? It's just because, you spend your life trying to say people, hey, we got to like snap out of this, y'all.
Yeah.
And part of that maybe is a Gnostic statement. We have to stop following, these toxic structures that have, if we want to be archetypal Jungian, have this archon like structure to them. We have to get out of this,
Hmm.
as a collective. And then on an individual level, there's something like we have to snap out of this as people and maybe take a different perspective on this. Like maybe the things around me, and we do this a lot on the pod, obviously, but the things around me that I think are just innocuous and benevolent really aren't. I got to like snap myself out of these things
Hmm.
and begin to think, okay, maybe what's really happening, and again, not in a way to be paranoid about it, but to be realistic about it. Maybe what's happening is like the forces around me don't have my best interest at heart. Is that radical of a statement? No, I don't think so. And I guess that's as Gnostic as you get on some level. Just the recognition,
Hmm.
like, wait a minute, these forces around me don't have my best interest at heart. And maybe what they're trying to do is they're trying to keep me from realizing my own spiritual power and my own spiritual truth. Maybe that's what they're up to.
Hmm.
It's not that far-fetched of a thing to say, whether you buy, all the metaphysics totally. I don't know if I buy it all either, but
Right.
as a structure, you're like, huh, there's something to that. And maybe
Yeah.
it gets personal. Like I think about people I love and I know. We get to the very end of this episode,
Yeah. Yeah.
where I'm like, hey, snap out of this, please, you know, and maybe start reframing this because it's people you really love and you really care about. I think that's why I get so emotional about it.
I think
We're
they
talking
call
and
that an intervention, Eric.
well, it would be an intervention of one, me, against no one else who wants to intervene. But you know how it is. We all have people where you think about the people that you love and you really want to see them like grow
Totally.
and thrive and
Yeah.
do this. And you're like, snap out of this, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's the reason I get so fucking emotional about it. It really hits kind of deep, and part of it is this Gnostic stuff is in part correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
to recognize this is in part correct. And again, you bring up things like the Epstein thing, these big collective things where you're like, oh, that's creepily accurate.
Well, the other part,
The
Eric, is
eyes wide
that
shut part, and then some of it's personal. Oh, I love this person or that person in my life. We've known each other for years. I want to see them go forward, and it seems like they're stuck. And a lot of what they're stuck in is, if you're being Gnostic about it, the forces that are at play that really don't have your best interest at heart and probably want to hold you stuck. Yeah. Anyway,
well, and
sorry.
just
End of my
on
spiel.
the
Yeah.
on the Gnostic piece, just before we wrap it up, Gnosticism was in response to Christianity and
Well,
Judaism.
either or it's like one of the earliest Christianities too, depending on
Right.
the right. Yeah.
Right, but it's in response to that. So it is looking at though it is playing off of those belief systems. Now, today we have many other belief systems that we can pick from and learn from and weave together and see the correlations and the differences and all this other kind of stuff. But at the time when it came out, it was, antithetical really to the beliefs of the people who were in its vicinity in its nation states. And it
So it's
was
going to be in conflict with more orthodox religious systems,
correct.
or they're going to
Correct.
be in conflict with one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, that's where it's born out of that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it resembles stuff that we're familiar with now, but for many people, this was, heresy, and many people lost their lives and were tortured, because they believed something that was not the orthodox view, which today we, are not killed for this. And that's great. But for a
Yes.
long time, people who were exploring their own internal workings, it's they were persecuted, they were killed. And I think, correlations to today, and we don't really talk about this very much, so we're at the end here, but people who are exploring their sexuality, people who are exploring their identity, there's always been scapegoats for every society because they represent the kind of evolution in exploration, whether or not they end up being that way for the rest of their life or whatever, but it helps humanity evolve in order to push the envelope. So it wasn't that long ago that the society was disgusted seeing an interracial relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. For
Society
sure.
was disgusted. And most people now, it's not a big deal. I mean, you have a right-leaning African American Supreme Court justice been married for a long time to a white woman.
Hmm.
But when they got together, that still was a little taboo, only in
Yeah.
America, as they say.
Yeah. I guess like, I guess to be continued. Yeah. There's this thing where there's like a tension even within the culture of like, can we get to more progressive, free ideas, or are
Yeah.
we going to be held down by things that are more reactionary?
Yeah.
That's true. And it affects like overall, or can affect us on an individual level too.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, it makes me emotional.
Oh, yeah. That's okay.
Gets all my feels going.
Passion is good.
I think it's the kind of the idea that what makes you want to be like let's say for example a tantric Buddhist. Why do you want to do it? You want to not only see yourself free, you want to see all living things be able to transcend these things.
That's the motivation.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's other people's choice whether they agree with you or not. You can't impose things on people. In the ways you're no better than an Archon, but the passion is there. The passion
That's
in the
okay.
fire, as you would say, as the
That's right.
coach would say, you need the passion in the fire.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Well, thank you
All right.
for
Thanks so
uh,
much, Daniel.
for sharing your passion. Audience, thanks for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe, hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com, or on the podcast, on the Instagram at the Gin and Tantra Podcast. We love the comments and feedback and all that kind of stuff. Even if you're talking shit, we like that too. So thanks for tuning in. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye bye.